Hi, Sandra.
Hello, Jamie.
This is so fun. I was saying that this is an extra treat for me to get a preview of Thick as Thieves because I've actually had the pleasure of meeting you several times at conferences, and it's always a pleasure and a privilege to get to interact with a kind of a breathing icon. But you're even in a special category because your work practically defines a sector of our genre. I mean, Stephanie may very well and have had the experience. I mean, I think your name is a unit of measure. They come up to the bookseller and say, okay, this is a romantic suspense, but how many Sandra Brown units of good is it?
Well, thank you for all of that. I'm humbled.
No, it's wonderful. And we're going to get into Thick as Thieves, but I wanted to ask you at the beginning, with this kind of level of success, this huge fan base, and all of the momentum that comes with it. And like Stephanie said, you have, I thought it was like 71 New York Times bestsellers.
Well, actually, as of yesterday, it's 72.
72. That's, I knew that was going to happen. So this is your 72nd.
Thick as Thieves debuted at #1 on the combined list of print and ebooks on the New York Times. So
that's fantastic.
Yeah.
I figure we must be getting up on that. So my question to you about that is, can you throw your mind back and tell us the story of the first time you received that wonderful news?
Oh gosh, it's a vivid memory. I had been writing for 10 years, and it was May 23rd, 1990. Gosh, that sounds so long ago. It was so long ago. But I was driving home from visiting a friend, and I had picked my son up at school. He was sitting in the front seat next to me, and I got a call on my cell phone, which was about the size of a loaf of bread. and it was my husband said, "Can you stop by the office on your way home?" And I said, "Sure." So I walked in, and here was this bouquet of yellow roses. And I said, "What's the occasion?" And he said, "Well, you haven't checked, but the publisher has called, your agent has called. Mirror Image is #8 on the paperback New York Times bestseller list." And I was just, that was the first time. And so I remember the day vividly, because of all the people who were calling. And my agent had actually called my husband, caught him before she caught me, and said, "Michael, I have some extraordinary news."
So you were the last to know.
It was extraordinary. It was definitely a turning point in my life. I was no better an author the day after I got that news than the day before or the day of. But the perception of Sandra Brown in the marketplace changed exponentially. Just having that title. So whether or not I had ever been on the Times list again, it was New York Times bestseller, and it's like Academy Award nominee. It's like it changes. It changed my perception in the marketplace, and because of that, more opportunities were afforded me. So it was definitely a change of life.
Definitely. So I'm the little teaser in the jacket copy of Thick as Thieves, I was gonna read that because I just really loved it. And it says, 20 years ago, in the dead of night, 4 seemingly random individuals pulled the ultimate heist and almost walked away with $500,000. But by daybreak, their plan had been shot to hell. One of them was in the hospital, one was in jail, one was dead, and one got away with it. And so your books are kind of known for steamy love scenes, but way more than that, big plot twists. So I don't want to give a whole bunch away. I wanted to make sure I didn't do spoilers. So basically the way I see it is that when Arden Maxwell comes back to Caddo, Texas, her childhood home, a place where she and her sister kind of slunk away in disgrace after their father disappeared in the wake of a terrible, terrible crime. The misdeeds of the past just kind of perk right up and get right back to ruining lives. And there will definitely be some reckonings on this. So.
Right. Well, it's interesting that it really, that quote, that teaser comes from the prologue. And that is how the whole book started. I didn't know about the reckoning. I didn't know that the main plot, the present day, was going to be 20 years after the fact. What happened was I was sitting at my desk one day doing something else, all alone in my office, and I heard someone say, talking about it is the surefire way to get caught. And I looked around and I was alone. And it's one of those schizophrenic moments that writers had. It was like, who said that? And what's the situation? And all of a sudden, I was standing in that ditch with those thieves with a bag of money between them, deciding what they were going to do from this point forward. They'd obviously pulled a successful heist, and started writing what I saw, what I heard, what I smelled, identified, these 4 people by their shoes. It didn't really, so an idea began to take place, and I just wrote for several hours, and at the end of it, the prologue ended with those words. By daybreak, that plan had been shot to hell. One was in the hospital, one was in jail, one was in the morgue, and one got away with it. And I thought, I have no idea who these people are, what the circumstances are, but I'm starting to ask all these questions. And I think if a reader is reading it, he's going to be asking those same questions. I wanted to know what the answers to were. So I sent it to my editor, and I just said, what do you think about this? He called me the next day. He said, I think it's terrific. I can't wait to see what happens. I said, well, that makes 2 of us. I can't wait to see what happens either. And I at that point in time, that prologue had no story behind it, but I had 450 pages to figure it out. And then I determined it would be a your sins will find you out plot. It would be, and so I then moved completely away from there, opened it 20 years later, and the story evolves from there.
One of the particular achievements of this book, I think, is that character revealed, we get to know these people a large part by their relationships with other people. Their relationships end up being like a mirror, and that's how we know them. And so there were a couple in particular that I wanted to ask you about and let you elaborate on it, because we start with Arden Maxwell, who is the heroine. And when we meet her, she's beaten down. She's kind of a victim.
A wimp.
Yeah, she's a little wimpy. But she's had a lot going on. She's not been able to get it together, and she's kind of a victim. But in the first exchange, in the today part of the book, the very first thing is this conversation with her sister. And there towards the end, there's a little spark of pushback in her. And it's kind of like Chekhov's gun on the mantle. As soon as that happens, you know she's going to go off at least once in this book, because there it is. So I wanted to ask you about Arden in that, which is funny because that's actually the name of the town I live in. I live in Arden. So, but I wanted to ask you about that. Was that fun to give her that little spark and then find ways to employ that?
And that's another thing. So much, I think, and I'm sure you can identify with this, Jamie. So much of what we write, I think, is accidental. I think that the characters kind of take over. And I've started the present day completely differently. But I ended it with that scene with her sister, and then I decided that scene needed to be up front because she really does. We start hearing all these failures on her part, and I thought, she's gonna. This is not a heroine, you know. She is, as you said, beaten down. She's got nowhere to go, no career going for her. She's just had this terrible experience when she thought she had everything put together. And but then she says, um, and I'm not really giving anything away here, but her sister's been, and I thought, can I write this entire scene without the heroine saying anything? There's not one word of dialogue from her. Her sister's doing all the talking, and I thought, can I get by with writing the first chapter without the heroine speaking a word? And then the last sentence is, are you finished? If so, leave. If not, leave anyway. And I thought, finally, you know, she's grown a pair.
Right,
But
right.
it was like, you know, she's finally, and it kind of defined in that once, and I wasn't smart enough to think it up. It was the heroine, Arden, who thought it up. But it was her, I think I referred to it later in the book as her Declaration of Independence.
Yeah.
And it kind of defined the entire relationship for the reader. Up to that point in time, she had been, you know, subjected to her sister's authority. And because the events that happened 20 years ago, Arden was only 10 years old. So all of her responses were that of a child. And then her sister became her guardian. So the sister really had the parental role. But that was her Declaration of Independence. Very keen of you to pick up on that.
No, it was great fun. And, you know, it sounds like almost damning you with faint praise to say that this is a little bit of a masterclass, and everything that happens to move the plot forward comes from a relationship, you know. And that sounds, like I said, like a little bit like faint praise, except because that's the way life works. But art doesn't imitate life sometimes as often as it should. And this book is a masterclass in it. So
thank you.
The hero, I want to ask you a little bit about him because Burnett, that's right, Ledge Burnett, he's in a bit of a pincher situation, I think, between two relationships that are very different, and they show us who he is. He's got this relationship with the district attorney, Rusty Dial, and these men have known each other for a long time. They have each other's number, and it's almost a stalemate of knowledge of each other. And then there's this other relationship, this new alliance he ends up forming with Arden Maxwell, who can't seem to figure out at all. And we learn about Ledge by watching him in this sort of bouncing in this set of parenthetical relationships. So I kind of wondered about him because that's how he's revealed. Did he sort of do the Athena thing and spring out of your head fully formed, or did you have to, while you were figuring out what the story was, did he sort of get carved away and you figured him out then?
Well, of course, I knew from the start which of the characters he was in the ditch. The way I described him in the ditch, I thought, that's my hero. And that's all I knew about him when I wrote the prologue, is just what he did during that confab on the side of the road. I knew that he was going to be the hero. He was so complex because, and difficult to write, honestly, because he did have the relationship with his uncle, which shows a certain side of him, his relationship with his, you know, Don, his friend, and the kind of the mentor role in the book with Crystal, and then with Arden, and then certainly with Rusty. And in all of these relationships, he was different. we saw a different facet of him. He was also the keeper of the vault of secrets. And so I wanted to make him honorable, but without giving anything away. And so if if a character is a keeper of the secrets and you're writing from his point of view, my credo is that you still have to be fair to the reader.
Yeah.
You can't have him think or say anything that's not true. So that was a constant challenge for me, is how do I let Ledge impart information without flat out lying and without being disingenuous to the reader, because nothing chaps me more than to get to the end of the book and I'm waiting, wait a minute, we were inside that character's head and they were thinking this and that's not it.
Yeah.
That's not the truth. So I had to be truthful for Ledge, but still keeping secrets from Arden and keeping secrets from the reader.
Right, and you threaded that needle in a way that nobody really realized. I mean, it didn't look like a trick. The strings didn't show. So bravo on that.
Thank you.
I
found that I painted myself into a corner, though, because I was like, oh, he can't say that. He can't even think that. It has to be, it had to be maneuvered with words so that it was not, it was authentic, but it was still a secret, but he wasn't being a complete liar.
Right. I wanted to ask about you as a writer. What is a writing day like for you? I mean, do you write every day? Do you write at home? Do you have an office somewhere? What do you like to do?
Well, right now I'm in my home office. It's like a phone booth. If I move from this spot, but I work here like on the weekends. But since I began, actually, it was just a year or so after I began writing that I got an office outside the house, because I had children at home, little children at home. And once they got to school, it was like a vacation. I could write while they were at school, but I found that as long as I was at home and I was the mom and the mother and the sister and the neighbor and the friend, nobody took me serious. I mean, they did, but it wasn't like I was a nurse in a hospital that they would visit and pull off work. It was like they drop in for, tea or something. And so I had to go to work every day.
Right.
And it was one of the best things I ever did. And even now, during this pandemic, I have a staff of 2 full-time employees in the office, but they are staying at home. They're working from home. But I started developing really bad habits, being here at home every day. So a few weeks ago, I started going into the office all by myself, just because I thought, I can't let down this discipline that has served me well for the last 40 years of literally going to work every day. Right. And so I do work outside the house. In terms of a day-to-day thing, it's different now than it was when I began, because I'm not working around children and raising them. But it depends on where I am in the manuscript. I write nearly every day, but 3 or 4 times a year, depending on where I am in the manuscript, I go completely away, shut down my life. No hair, no makeup, no clothes, no appointments, no social life. I go and lock myself in, and all I do is write. And I love those times. Those are my favorite times, because I get to play make-believe all day, every day with my characters, and I become totally immersed, in the story. And I think that's essential. It has to come down to that personal relationship with those
Right.
characters and without the distraction. And as well as I do, that the business aspect of this career of ours is a major distraction. And I try to inform everyone I'm going underground.
Wow.
There's something really that needs my attention. I've got to write the book.
Right.
If I don't write the book, none of us has a job. So,
But there's something kind of satisfyingly inevitable about you becoming a writer, because I've heard you speak before, and I know that you didn't start out knowing you wanted to be a writer, but in your anecdotes and what you were talking about, it seems like story was kind of in your blood, narrative was kind of in your blood, because you talk about these wonderful stories that your family would tell, that they all were wonderful raconteurs. And then you went into broadcast news, which if there's no story, there's no nothing. So when you found yourself with I know the story, and I want you to tell them, with this opportunity, did it feel a little, at least on a DNA level, did it feel a little inevitable, that story, did it feel natural once you started trying to tell stories?
and in hindsight, it feels inevitable. But what Jamie is referring to is that I was working for the ABC affiliate in Dallas part-time, and I got fired from my job. And so it was really kind of on a dare from my husband, who said, now you've got time and opportunity to do what you always said you wanted to do, and that's write fiction. But my gene pool was so engineered that way. My father was an editorial writer. And from him, I guess I learned the discipline of what it takes if you're writing for a living. Because he had to go to work every day and produce something out of nothing. Of course, he would write, political comment, or he might write something totally unrelated, just funny. But he had to produce 500 words a day that would go into the next paper, the newspaper, the next day. And then my mother was a romantic, an avid reader, and I have 4 little sisters. And so she would read to all of us before we could read to ourselves. And she was always telling us stories and everything. So our home was so full of books. It was such a part of all of our lives was reading, and they really instilled in me a love and respect, of storytellers and written words. So when I was given this challenge by my husband, said, are you going to do it or talk about it? We set up a card table in the spare room, and I bought a Selectric typewriter, IBM Selectric typewriter, and that's when I started. And I didn't know that I could do it, but I had such a fire in my belly that I really wanted to. And then when I began, I guess it's as you say, it was like, did I ever know? And I didn't. But when I began, it was like all the lights came on. And I knew this was what I was supposed to do with my life, which I realize is a very enviable enlightenment, to have. It was like, oh, wow, I love this. And because you do it too, you have to love it, because it's too damn hard to do if you don't love it. And yet, on the other hand, it's the best job in the world. We get to make believe for a living. So it's a love-hate relationship, definitely.
That was what I was going to ask. I wanted to know, because it is funny to hear writers talk about, of course, there's the moments of inspiration and these discoveries, but what are the parts of the novel writing process that drive you crazy? What do you hate about it?
Well, I hate getting into the middle of it and having that spike that is, kind of the flip. Up to this point, everything's been going one way, and then, uh-oh, just kidding. You got to go the other way. And most often, I build in enough spikes to where I know where they have to come in the story structure. Going to lead the reader up so far, and then a flip, and then this one, and then another flip. But sometimes I get to that, and I've got nothing. I've got 200 more pages, and I have no idea what's going to come next. And I've got to fill that with other bad stuff. And so it can last for 2 hours, or it can last for 2 weeks, where I'm sitting there thinking, what am I going to do with these people?
Right.
And why aren't they talking to me anymore? Because I really feel like the characters at that point are leading the story.
Right.
But I still work. I still go to work every day. I still put in the time in the chair, staring at that blinking cursor. In this case, blinking is an expletive. Staring at that blinking cursor. Why doesn't something happen? But I use that time to go back and read up and rewrite. And I don't know about you, but I try to get the story out the first time. The first pass is just to get the story out before it leaves me, because I'm always afraid it's going to. But I rewrite every scene over and over and over again, milking as much from it as I possibly can. And I go through this little, formula thing. Does it have this? Does it have that? Does it have this?
That's fascinating, because I've just developed a sort of a systematic thing for my own work like that. Does it have this? Does it have that? Yeah, it's really interesting. Yeah.
But somebody smarter than I said, I read it one time, said, great books aren't written, they're rewritten. And I don't know how. I mean, I have colleagues say, oh, I do the first pass, and then by the time I get to the end of the book, it's ready to go. I'm going, oh gosh, that'd be like airing my dirty laundry. So I make it as I milk it for all it's worth before I ever send the book in.
That's really cool. I am seeing that we're getting some interesting questions, so I want to get to those, but I had two things that I had seen while stalking you that I wanted to ask you about. I saw that you did a couple of USO tours, and I thought that was really interesting because, of course, I understand what a comedian or a singer does. What does a writer do on a USO tour? I'm so curious. This is great.
Well, I told them I was a Dallas Cowboy cheerleader, but they didn't believe me. I said, I'm incognito. No, we were invited to go by the USO through International Thriller Writers. And the first one was Clive Cussler, Mark Bowden, who wrote Black Hawk Down, Kathy Wrights, Andrew Peterson, and who was another military writer, and me. And I was like, I have nothing in common with any of these people, but we went to Afghanistan.
Wow.
And it was the most remarkable 10 days of my life. I mean, it truly, truly was. And Kathy and I were the first women who had gone with as a writer's group. But what we did, in answer to your question, we didn't do a chorus line, that's for sure. But we held meet and greets, and we would go to various bases, combat outposts, and meet with not only the officers, but I mean with the troops. And it was so rewarding. They were so grateful. They kept saying, thank you so much for coming. Thank you. And we were like, no, we're here to thank you, not the other way around. But it was, so we talked, about books, about home, about football. I'm a big football fan, so I could always fall back on that.
That's wonderful.
But it was remarkable. And then a few years later, Kathy and I went again with another group to Guantanamo Bay. And that was a different experience because it isn't a war zone.
Mm-hmm.
In Afghanistan, it was flak jackets, the helmet, the get on the Black Hawk right now. I mean, and so it was grueling physically,
right.
but I wouldn't trade the experience for anything. It was amazing.
That's fantastic. And so before we toss it over to their questions, I ran across a question somebody asked you, and I was so charmed by the answer. I want to find out how you know about this and how often do you get to indulge. Somebody asked you, if you were a writer, what would you do? And you said a floral arranger.
Yeah.
And I love that. How did you find out you like to do that?
Oh, I've just always loved flowers. In fact, I'm looking at my orchid right here on my desk. I have fresh flowers all the time. But it's just kind of a hobby I've developed over the years. I like to get like a unique container. And even if I have like what I call scrap flowers, just stuff that you pick up in the grocery store, I try to make them as pretty as I can. I tear the whole thing apart. I don't put the bouquet in the vase. I take the whole thing apart and I'll add sticks or I'll add greenery or something. But I love to go in like these, lavish hotel lobbies where they've got these gorgeous arrangements. And one time I twisted the arm of the floral arranger in the Four Seasons in Beverly Hills. And he was doing an arrangement, and I started talking to him. He said, "Would you like to see our flower refrigerator?" And I was like, "Oh my gosh." And underneath the hotel was this vast storeroom and a refrigerator and all the tubs of fresh flowers. And I said, "Oh gosh, this was like flower porn." I loved it.
Okay, so I have to make a request then. What you need to do is you need to add a tab on your website and have a gallery of your arrangements, because we want to see what you do.
Well, I've done a lot. You could go back on Instagram or on my Facebook posts, because I do a lot. Sometimes I'll make one and I'll go, "Oh, and it's Valentine's Day or it's Mother's Day or it's Easter." And so I'll just take a picture of an arrangement.
That's cool. That is cool. Stephanie, will you get us some of these wonderful questions MC and Papa?
Yes, absolutely. First, I just want to say how delightful you two are. And I could actually just sit and listen to y'all talk all evening. So thank you so much. Just thoroughly enjoying your conversation.
I think Jackie, boy, she certainly has some great questions.
You really do.
It's really stimulating conversation.
Yeah, just delightful. I'm sorry that we only have an hour, but we also, of course, want to be careful with people's time. But yeah, it's just been wonderful. And one more side note, Sandra, thank you for my new go-to euphemism, which will be blinking whenever I want to say something ruder, but there are children in the room. Or
exactly.
Yeah, so that's perfect. Okay, so, and the first question is actually for me. A lot of times I type in just like a silly sample question, but this is actually a real question. And so I'll throw this one out first. And so it sounds like your characters really speak to you, and they live in your head. And I'm wondering how long they're alive in there once you're done writing the book.
Forever. Now, sometimes, I can't give a blanket answer. It's not forever for every character, but there are certain characters that really resonated, that really stood out to me. And I want to revisit them and see what they're doing while I'm not there. I want to go back and visit them. And readers are so sweet, because they'll say, "Oh gosh, write another book about so-and-so." They become really involved in the characters. And so that's a compliment, that I really appreciate, because I feel that way. I miss them sometimes. But my mother told me that I had an imaginary friend named Charlotte. and I don't even remember this. And we didn't even know anybody named Charlotte. So she doesn't even know where I got the name, but Charlotte went everywhere with us. And I would scold Charlotte, feed Charlotte, do everything. I still have imaginary characters. I still have imaginary friends. And it sounds totally schizophrenic, but they do talk to me, and so many times, you know, I'll just walk into a scene and they're acting it out, and I feel like I'm more of a eyewitness reporter. In fact, I really don't ever feel as though I create anything. As I described earlier to Jamie, when I was writing that prologue, I was just there all of a sudden. And so I feel like the story is already there. It's in a parallel universe, and it's just running along, and it's up to me to bring it out. So many times I'll go back, I'll pull one of those 82 books off the shelf and just open it up and start reading. And I have to say, honest and truthfully, I won't know what comes next. I'll turn the page, what happens after this? No, because it's almost as though I joined it in progress and I wrote it down. And so it's kind of crazy. It sounds kind of crazy, but yes, my characters become real people. And I remember I was writing a historical romance early in my career. And and my editor said, would you consider writing a sequel? Because one of those characters had become so vital to the reading audience. They were asking for it. And I said, well, yeah, I guess so. So when I was writing that sequel, one of the characters in the first book dies. And when I was writing, I was just sobbing. And my husband came in and he's like, oh my God, what's the matter? And I said, so-and-so died. And he goes, oh God, who the hell is so-and-so? And I went, oh, right. Well, but it broke my heart. And so then when readers would write me, and some wrote me hate mail saying, how dare you, kill off this character. And I was thinking, but that's the highest compliment they could pay me, because he had become such a important character to them. They had fallen in love with him. They considered him a real person. So it's a tribute when I hear that.
Well, it's wonderful to hear that the characters are as indelible for you as they are for your readers. It's easy to devolve into cynicism, and that to me is just the exact opposite. We know that these are not just sort of products that you're creating to to sell books. Like they're, yeah, that's really wonderful. Thank you for sharing.
And the villains as well as the protagonists, because your story is only as good as the villain. And the villain is the hero of his own story. And so he's thinking of himself as completely justified, so some of my favorite characters that I look back on, I think, oh, I loved Huff and White Hot, because in his mind, he was doing everything right. So sometimes the villain is the one that stands out in my mind as much as the protagonist.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right about that, about good villains, about how important good villains are to the story. So I'm gonna there's a question I'll come back to, or a double question I'll come back to, but I want to skip to this other one since we're on the topic of characters. And this one is, you have had so many characters that are also different, as we were just talking about, and across so many books. Are they ever based on people you know, or are they all, completely fictional? Maybe a mix of the two.
They're completely fictional, because nobody I know is nearly as interesting as my characters. You know, I think the worst advice, and Jamie, you may contradict me on this, but I think the worst advice you can give anybody is to write what you know. Because if I were writing what I know, it would be boring.
Well, I would be writing a lot about going to the grocery store.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you know, getting the kids off to school and you know, and so I write about things that I wish I knew. I write about people that, ooh, I'd love to, you know, eavesdrop on them for a year and a half, which is basically what I do. So no, and of course I draw from, you know, my environment. I'm a Texan. I draw on, you know, characters, but I don't really pattern any character after someone that I know personally. And I certainly don't pattern a character after an actor or actress. They say, well, who were you thinking of when you wrote this? And I'm like, well, I was thinking about that character. I mean, to me, if they walked in the room, I would know immediately, you know, who he or she was. So I don't imprint anybody's face on my character when I'm writing them. I see them as they are.
That only ever happened to me once as a character, and it was the guy in my head reminded me of Clive Owen, and that wasn't so bad. That was the only time that ever happened.
If you have to spend a year with somebody,
it wasn't so bad.
Jamie, I'd like to hear your answer to that question as well about your characters.
Yeah, mine are complete. I don't base characters on people I know almost ever. I mean, there's certainly people's experiences, or things that I've observed of them will be the kernel of something, but I take it to such an extreme, and I'm only writing my 4th book. I don't even like to name characters anybody of a name I know, and I'm running out of names because I know somebody with that name, you know, and so yeah, I never. Well, it's funny. I did have one person who is a friend of mine who's really good at arranging travel stuff. And I said, if you help me with this trip, my family, we were going to go to Spain. I said, if you help me with this, I will make you a character in my book. And so I did, but it's only her name and it's a few things about her physically. It's totally not her in any other way. But yeah, no, I don't do that.
I've been asked many times to, you know, as a charity auction thing to, you know, auction off the name of a character in the book. And I usually decline, but this year I was at a book festival, which shall remain nameless, and a man, and not because it was a bad thing, it was really a good thing, but and a gentleman at the night of the auction paid, I think it was $22,500 for this charity to be, and I thought, okay, you've bought a name in my book, but it has to be a good character.
Wow,
you know.
great.
So that was wonderful. But I feel the same way you do. I think, and naming a character is hard. I collect names and I get them from, you know, the baptism thing in our church, my grandson's school rosters, you know, everywhere. I kind of collect names, but you have to find the right one for the character. Sometimes they just don't fit. I have to change the name.
That was actually going to be my follow-up, was again with the number of characters that you've written. The question was going to be how do you name them? Yeah, that's wonderful. And just the odd auction winner here and there.
Yeah.
So I'm going to back up to 2 more questions. The first one is, at what point in your book do you go underground, as you described it? Is it generally the same place in each book?
the same place and the same stopping point along the process.
Right. Yeah, I think that's the question.
When I'm plotting, when I'm just plotting, and I don't do a detailed outline or anything like that, but when I'm just trying to come up with an idea, I usually kind of go away and take a yellow Liga tablet and just start making notes and what if and what if and what if. But usually the idea comes to me out of nowhere. I don't know where the idea comes from. And then when I really go away and go underground is right after the holidays, right after the 1st of January, because my book is due like March 1st, April. It's usually there April 1st, but March or April. So January, February, March are crunch time. And that's when I really, and by then I'm working on the final draft. And so that's when, as I mentioned before, I tear apart every scene and go over and over and over it. And that's when I really try and just immerse myself in the book, is right before I deliver it.
And actually the second question there, I think you just answered, even though I hadn't asked the question, but I'll go ahead and ask it in case you have anything to add. And the second part was, do you plot your books or just start them and see where the story takes you, as it sounds like you did a little bit more with Thick as Thieves?
Once I had the prologue and I knew that I had to, I felt like as though I was onto something. But of course I had to develop a story to go behind it. And so when I get the idea, I start working in, plot points, what's going to happen. And I build in those spikes I talked about, 2 or 3 of them. Sometimes an idea just lies there and does nothing. It just doesn't go anywhere. And I eventually have to abandon it. But when it starts percolating, I keep at it, and keep at it. And I know that the idea wants to become a story. When I figure out that one thing that I know that the reader doesn't know. And when I figure out that one thing, it's like my aha moment. Then it's like, aha, this is why I'm telling this story. This is the thing. And so everything from that point forward hangs on that one thing that's invisible, hopefully, to everybody but me. And that's when I really start writing it down. So I know where I'm going. I know what that final aha, that final revelation is going to be. So I know where I'm going. I don't know how I'm going to get there. And honestly and truthfully, that's the fun of writing fiction, because I can go to work every day and wait and see what's going to happen. So I know certain things have to be there, and I do build in some structure, but I really kind of like the spontaneity of just going to work and wait to see what happens.
That's great. We have a few minutes left, so I'm going to invite the folks in the audience to go ahead and submit their questions now if they have any more questions. And Jamie, actually, while we're waiting to see if we have any more questions from the audience, I wanted to go back to you and see if anything else has come up for you that you'd like to ask.
Well, one of the things I was thinking about while we were talking, I know that you've mixed genres. You started out, I think, almost exclusively romance novels.
Yeah.
And then it transitioned into romantic suspense. And combining those two things seemed like a very good idea. And does that feel like it just gives you so much more to work with? Why were you drawn to suspense? Why did it draw you away from romance?
I think it was an evolution. When I wrote the romances, I didn't know that I was going to write 45 of them before I ever moved into suspense. But it was like a good thing. And it was like, why fix it if it ain't broke? And so I kept writing them, but then it got to a creative decision. It was like, I really want to expand the perimeters of the genre. And at that point in time, it wasn't as liberated as is now. And now anything goes. Then there were guidelines, there were certain things we could not address. And I kept giving my editors heart attacks because I would want to do this, and so finally I just said, I really need to break out. And I wrote a book called Slow Heat in Heaven, which was my first, kind of standalone, and it incorporated suspense, and people were shocked. It was like, she used to be such a nice girl. And, but it was kind of my breakthrough. And then I started incorporating more and more suspense, mystery, and everything. And honestly, I had read that kind of book from wonderful English authors, Helen McGinnis, Evelyn Anthony, Victoria Holt. I mean, there were a whole bunch of them but it wasn't a popular, it wasn't a genre that really had been defined in the United States. And Eye of the Needle came out, Ken Follett's book, and I devoured that book. I loved it and read it and read it and read it. And I was like, why am I loving this espionage? And I thought, you know what? It's because of this sexy love story, which wasn't really kind of a love story, but it was that sexual tension. Right. And I thought, there is a genre here. There is a genre. It can be combined. And I wasn't the only one. I mean, there were a lot of my colleagues who were doing the same thing. But we did kind of carve out a niche where, you could incorporate a relationship, even if it's a forbidden, it should be forbidden, in fact, but that forbidden relationship in the midst of this very crisis situation. So, but I can't really take credit for discovering it because it was there. I just happened to mine it, I think.
Yeah, but when you get your 72nd New York Times bestseller, I think Sandra Brown Units of Good is a perfectly logical measurement.
Thank you.
Absolutely. And we do have another question from the audience, and I think this will probably be our last one. Thank you so much, everyone, for submitting these excellent questions, and again, Jamie, for your excellent questions, and just have to say again how great it's been to listen to you, Sandra.
You so much.
Thank you so much. And so our last question will be, how much research do you do?
It depends on the book. Actually, for Thick as Thieves, I didn't have to do very much because there wasn't really a technical anything, and I was familiar with Caddo Lake. So I did research on that. And the most research that it required was like the Texas Penal Code, the statute of limitations on what crime, and would it be a misdemeanor, would it be a felony, that kind of thing. But the book before that, Out Fox, I had to do a lot of research on because it was about like a Ted Bundy character. So I had to research the psychology. And the book before that was Tailspin. And I literally had to learn how to fly an airplane. And I don't know how to fly an airplane. I'm not ready to solo. But that, and then also in that book was all of the pharmaceutical research, which is very timely now that we're trying to develop a vaccine for COVID, but I had to learn about all the trials that pharmaceuticals go through. And actually I had someone who assisted me on that research. And I had a pilot who taught me through crashing an airplane and flying an airplane and all of that. So that required a lot of research. It really depends on the subject matter.
It sounds like as you go, you're picking up a lot of information that may not be useful in your daily life, but it must be great at like cocktail parties.
Oh, and that's where write what you know. What happens is you go out and know some stuff, you know,
Right.
and so you do know a bit, and then you know people, and you combine those two sets of knowledge. So I think write what you know is deceptive, because between research and trying to understand people, you know enough. You know.
Usually what I do is write the story the way I want it to be. And then I contact the expert and say, okay, here's my scenario. Tell me how I can mold and fashion this to where it's authentic. But I have to truthfully say that I much prefer the plain make-believe. And so I think that the best research is the research that's invisible. I have to know it and I have to make it real, but I don't want to bore my reader with paragraphs and pages showing off how smart I am. Because anything that I write that draws the reader out of the story is wrong. They should be so into that story that they may be learning something, but they're not even aware of their learning it. So I like to apply the things that I've learned through research, but in a way that I'm not banging the reader over the head with it. That it doesn't draw them out of the story. It's woven into the context of the story to where they learn something without even realizing it.
So we're at 7 o'clock, and Sandra, I would just like to ask you if there's anything that you would like to leave our audience with this evening.
Oh, well, thank you to you, Stephanie, and the bookstore. I can't wait to come in person. Thank you, Jamie. The next time you happen to be in the audience where I'm speaking, or I'll be in the audience where you're speaking, let's meet face to face. I'd love to continue this over drink sometime. And thank you out there who joined us for this conversation. I appreciate so much. My gratitude knows no bounds to the readers who have followed me for so many years. I'm amazed and so grateful that I'm able to do this, continue to do it, and I'm so grateful for all of you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sandra. And Jamie, thank you again.
It was great. Thanks for thinking of me for it. It was great.
Yeah, so enjoyed it. And we encourage you all, of course, to keep reading, keep shopping indie. And we know that we'll be able to count on another wonderful book from Sandra pretty soon. So keep an eye out for that. And we look forward to seeing you all again at another event soon as well.
Thank you.
And look forward to the day when we can, share the same space.
Absolutely. Good night.
Good night, everybody. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.